Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Jay Stevens Podcast. This is episode 39, dedicated to a member of the only team since the AFL-NFL merger to have a perfect season, Mr. Larry Zonka. And as always, thank you for listening and downloading to another episode of the podcast. Remember to always subscribe, rate, and review. It's a great way for people that are searching for a new podcast to listen to come across this one. Then remember to always get the word out about the podcast via word of mouth. The things that we enjoy in life, we are more willing and somewhat wired to tell other people about. So no matter if this is your first episode or if you have been listening since episode 1, be sure to people know about the podcast. The day that I've been talking about for the past 2 episodes is finally here. A gentleman that I went to college with, Mr. Garrett Grandy, has joined us to be our second guest on the podcast. There are a couple things that happen when Garrett and I get together to talk about sports. Number one, we have fun. I think that's very evident throughout the entire conversation that Garrett and I have. Number two, our conversations are pretty lengthy, and I could say with the one that we just had, I'm talking about Boston Celtics and NBA basketball, then also the NFL and the Patriots, was no different. This conversation that we had went well over an hour, so I broke it up into 2 parts. Part 1 will be today. Part 2 will be a week from today, next Monday. So part 1 will be all basketball, NBA, Boston Celtics geared. Part 2 will be all NFL, New England Patriots geared towards that. So without further ado, you're not here to listen to me today. This is all about Garrett. Let's go ahead and take a trip to Black River, New York, and welcome our second guest on the podcast, Mr. Garrett Grandy.
Hey, Garrett. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, well, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be with you today and discussing these topics with you.
Okay, good deal, man. Hey, first thing first, basketball just started. What was your introduction to Celtics basketball?
Well, my dad, my family, grew up in the Boston area. So my dad grew up during the time when the Celtics dynasty, was at its peak, really, 70s, 80s. With Bird, McHale, Parrish, the old guys there, and
the good days.
So the good days. Yeah, we've had some rough days. We still got a good team, but certainly not like of old. And so I was introduced through those clips. Watching Larry Bird, watching McHale, watching Parrish. Totally a different brand of basketball than today. But definitely, I would say that's how I was introduced into Celtics basketball.
Okay. What was maybe your first memory, earliest memory or favorite memory when you were a kid of Celtics basketball?
I would say, we tried to watch as many games as possible, and so I grew up watching, the younger Paul Pierce, Antoine Walker. He was a character, that's for sure.
Yes. Yeah.
But those early days, Paul Pierce, he really carried that team. So there was many exciting moments with him. So I mean, as a kid, I was a huge fan of Paul Pierce, obviously, and Antoine Walker. We had some rough characters on those early teams, but certainly because of Paul Pierce, that was really that was really the excitement around that team. Not a championship team, that's for sure. I mean, we made a few playoff runs, but could never get past those Jason Kidd Nets and even those 76ers at that time were pretty good. And the Pistons had their little dynasty going on at that time as well. So, but certainly because of Paul Pierce, I would say those were exciting times. Even though they weren't as good as those teams, they still competed and were exciting to watch.
Yeah, they definitely were. Definitely, I remember growing up and being a Pacers fan. There would be those years. It seemed like a young Paul Pierce went up against the Pacers and Reggie Miller at the time.
Yeah.
I just remember some of those fun battles back then, early 2000s, when Paul Pierce started to really make a name for himself there. You've been privileged to have a couple good coaches. Well, great coaches, you may want to say. One's young now. One is not in Boston anymore. He's in L.A. Doc Rivers and Brad Stevens. Which would you say you prefer, coaching style, the way they communicate with the team, the players, adjustments, things like that? Which one would you prefer between Doc Rivers and Brad Stevens?
Well, this is kind of I've been thinking about this a lot, between these two, even when Brad Stevens was first introduced. I find that overall, I think Doc Rivers is the better coach. But for this Celtics team and for that transformation from all those young players to even what we have now, which is still a lot of young players, but certainly players that have been more developed, I think Brad Stevens is a better coach for this style of team where you've got so many young players. Whereas with Doc Rivers having the big three, he can handle those, superstar egos. And you saw what happened with Kyrie Irving and Brad Stevens in that situation. It seems to me that Brad Stevens and Kyrie Irving probably had their battles because, he's got that superstar ego, and Brad Stevens is more geared towards those younger developing players. Both have their styles and have their, things that make them great. I would certainly say that in history, when we look at history, Doc Rivers is, going to go down as one of the best ever. Brad Stevens is still writing his story, but I think it was, Greg Popovich a couple years ago said he thought that Brad Stevens was the best coach in the game. Of course, probably besides himself, but I'm sure he wouldn't say that. But certainly, it's been wonderful to have those two coaches back to back because you have so much turnover when it comes to coaches. You have a coach that can go a couple years, have really bad years, and he's gone. Then you bring in another guy, and you see that. I think you see that with the Knicks and others. They just can't have that. They don't have that stable foundation right now. And I think you have that with the Celtics. And for me, I think Doc Rivers is definitely the better coach, but for this Celtics team, I think Brad Stevens is better suited to the situation that you have. And I think that would be how I would answer that question.
Okay. I was thinking about this earlier today, thinking back when Doc Rivers was the coach of the Celtics and they won the championship versus now when everyone's saying all the Celtics should be winning the championship, they should be the best in the East, and all these things that they're hyping up about the team. Well, I think one difference between now versus then was Doc Rivers had a lot of seasoned guys. He had a lot of guys. Even though he had a young Rajon Rondo, he had a Ray Allen who was seasoned all-star, could help him out and help him mature. You had a Kevin Garnett help him mature. You had a Paul Pierce help him mature, help groom him. And they had leaders on that team. This team now, it's very, very young, and it's players that newer, younger players that are coming into the league, and they're kind of being thrust into a leadership role, or they're just being thrown into the fire and saying, hey, you're the leader of this team now. I know you have no experience. I know you're not used to anything going on to the NBA, but we're expecting you to be the leader of the team right now. Do you think Doc Rivers would be able to? I know what you just said earlier, but do you think Doc Rivers would be able to adjust to this younger group now versus what he did back in like the 2010-2009 seasons, I believe?
Yeah, I think based on what I remember from that time when Doc Rivers was, off to LA, which was a big shock. Everyone said, wow, Doc Rivers is gone, and now you've got this guy come in. Now, of course, Brad Stevens with Butler, I think it was back-to-back championships he made it to, and that was pretty incredible, taking that program how he did. And some would say that they were robbed there with Duke, but we won't get into that. But, and he, of course, now Brad Stevens is reunited with Gordon Hayward. I certainly think that Doc Rivers would be able to definitely identify this particular person as the leader of the team. I would agree with that. I think Brad Stevens is still maturing and developing. I think over time you're going to see out of this group who is the leader, because you don't really – with Kyrie, it was Kyrie – this is Kyrie's team, and that didn't work. It just didn't work. Right now you've got Kemba, you've got Gordon Hayward. You've still got some superstar players, no doubt. I would say both of those players, maybe Hayward is kind of getting back to his old self. Of course, he just fractured his hand, unfortunately. But I would say Kemba's a superstar. But you certainly see with Kemba a whole different mentality. and I think that has to do with the fact that he just came from Charlotte, a much smaller market. He's growing into a bigger market, whereas with Kyrie, he was with LeBron. I mean, he was in the big limelight from the very start. You know, you're playing with one of the best players to ever play the game. But of course, no one would argue that LeBron wasn't the leader of that team. You know, I mean, Kyrie was the number 2, and then, you know, Kevin Love probably. But certainly nobody would argue that LeBron wasn't the leader of the team, and now Kyrie's thrust. I think he's even admitted and apologized, you know, recently that, you know, hey, I guess I wasn't ready to be, you know, in that role per se. But I don't want to get off the subject of the coaches, but I think with Doc Rivers, I think he would at this moment do a better job at identifying you're the leader of this team, and everyone else is going to follow suit with that plan, with that mentality.
Yeah. Before we get to the current landscape and current team, how you think this team is going to go, I know you talked about Kyrie a little bit, and I mentioned this to you before when I talked about having you on the podcast. Elaborate on the Kyrie conversation for me and how you saw that from your side, because for me it seemed like it was two guys that had a mindset that when the two concept of two ideas and the two heads met, it didn't seem like it went very well. And of course, I'm away from the area and away from the day-to-day and what you're hearing on the radio and stuff like that. What did you see, or what did other fans say how they viewed Kyrie and his tenure in Boston?
You know, with fans in Boston, with the media in Boston, it is extremely cruel. I mean, you know, not to go into a different sport, but if you look at, for example, the Red Sox right now, you know, you just won a championship and then you fire the general manager, you know, the next year. I mean, that's Boston sport. That's Boston sports for you. And I would say that's a lot of places too in New York. But man, we can turn on you and just you can win a championship the next year. If you don't live up to par, you know, you're going to get turned on. And I think what I saw was a lot of people that, yes, Kyrie had his issues, but I felt like, you know, the Boston media and people around certainly helped push him out the door. I think there was a meeting at a certain point in the season that they had with the season ticket holders, and, you know, Kyrie said, hey, you know, if you want me back, I'm going to come back. And I'm not going to sit here and say that he was lying. I'm sure that he probably wanted to come back because he wanted to have a healthy Gordon Hayward. Let's see what we can do, because they never really got to have a healthy team.
Right.
You had Kyrie was missing time. He was hurt for a little while. Of course, Hayward had his terrible the injury that he had. And then, you know, Horford really was the main one that was sticking it out. But I certainly think that Horford leaving played a major role in Kyrie leaving. I think Kevin Durant was obviously having conversations with Kyrie. Hey, man, let's team up and, you know, let's go to Brooklyn, or maybe, you know, who knows where they were trying to lobby each other to go. But certainly at some point, Kyrie his mind was made. You can see that his mind was made up. That he was out the door. And towards the end of the year, it was bad. I mean, you know, you got players complaining, and he's complaining about the younger players, and everybody wants to be in the limelight. And in today's day and age, everything is out on the table. And you even had, you know, him talking with LeBron, which was really strange, with you know, him apologizing to LeBron and them talking to each other. And everyone thought, well, you know, Kyrie's going to go to the Lakers then because they made up, and, you know, he needs to go to the Lakers. So it was a really crazy situation, and I think everybody knew that he was going to be out the door, you know.
Yeah. Would you have him back? Let's say this year or in a couple of years, things don't go well in Brooklyn and he wants to go back to Boston. Would you personally be okay with having Kyrie Irving back in Boston?
Oh, that's a tough one. I would say no. No. I don't think that him in that situation, because you know, they just signed Jaylen Brown long term. I don't think Jason Tatum's going anywhere. You know, all that. I don't think I don't think it would be a good situation for him to go back into, certainly.
Have you ever thought about making your own podcast? It seems like that's the in thing right now. Well, do I have the people for you? Anchor is a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing your podcast. Best of all, it's 100% free and extremely easy to use. And now, Anchor will match with great sponsors who want to advertise on your podcast. That means you can get paid for podcasting right away. To get started, go to anchor.fm/start. Once again, that's anchor.fm/start.
This year's team, season just started. I'm still getting adjusted to the season starting in the middle of October, beginning to middle of October. I'm so used to Halloween. Of course, I'm not that old, but it's what I've been used to most of my life. What are your expectations for this year's Celtics team? And go wherever you want with this.
Sure. My expectations for this year's Celtics team, I certainly think the West is so much, still so much stronger than the East.
Crazy.
And you've even had more superstars head out to the West, like D'Angelo Russell. Of course, Kyrie and Durant are now in the East. But you look at the East, the landscape of the East. I think you've got Milwaukee with Giannis. You've got Toronto is still strong. Because you've got Siakam, you've got some players there that I think they're 6-2 already. They're not falling off the cliff because the Claw ran to LA. Also you've got some other strong teams there in the East. Right now, of course, the Celtics do have the best record in the East, but I think I can see them making the conference finals. Mm-hmm. But the fact that they don't have bigs to match up with a team like the Sixers, that's who I see coming out of the East is the 76ers, because they present so many problems for the Celtics that I don't see how the Celtics can make. And honestly, I don't even think Enes Kanter has played, but Enes Kanter is not the answer for going. Yeah, so have I. But they signed him and brought him in, and I mean it was disappointing for Al Horford to leave, but the fact that he joined the 76ers just made them even stronger. Horford's he's not an Embiid, there's no doubt about that, but he's still a versatile big man, and they call him playoff Al for a reason. He shows up in big moments, and I think that's something the 76ers needed, is somebody else to show up in big moments. And people forget that if it wasn't for Kawhi's miracle shot, in Game 7, the ball seemingly hanging on the rim for 25 seconds there and grabbing and pushing it into the rim, you're talking about the 76ers possibly being the champions. I mean, they were that close. They pushed that Toronto team whereas the Warriors couldn't even push them to a Game 7,
No.
So, I mean, right there, it tells me that the 76ers, I think, are the team of the East, in my opinion. The Celtics really they're right there, but they need a big man that can grab rebounds, and they just don't. Like, for example, last year when they played Milwaukee, I mean, Milwaukee ran them off the court. They couldn't compete with with Giannis. Giannis would grab 15, 16, 17 boards a game. And they couldn't compete with that. They just can't. And that's something that desperately needs to be addressed. And I know they've got Robert Williams. They've got some young guys they're developing, but they're certainly not at the level, I think, whereas if you're going to get into a 7-game series like you would with Milwaukee or Philadelphia, then they're going to really struggle. I think they're going to win more games than they did last year. I would put them in the the range of 55 wins, somewhere around there. They might even get a second, third seed. But I don't.
Oh wow!
I just in the 7-game series, I don't think that they can. Now, if they stay healthy, obviously, and you've already got Hayward, but of course he fractured his non-shooting hand, so there's a good possibility he might be able to come back from that for fairly quickly. But I certainly think they'll be a better team than they were last year, which is crazy to say, because I wouldn't say that Kemba's better than Kyrie, but I I don't think that they can get over that hump into the finals yet. Maybe in a couple years, maybe if they can develop Robert Williams, then, or some of those other guys that they have. Of course, they signed good old Taco Fall, but I don't think that he's he's playing in probably some D League or something. And everyone's been excited about him, but I don't think that he's going to ever really, develop into that, big man that they need to compete with Philadelphia.
Yeah, I was amazed that when he made his preseason debut, everybody loved him like a fan favorite. The guy's done nothing for the team, but he's instantly a fan favorite. And I think a couple of days later, they put it back down to the G League. I'm like, it's crazy to think about. Fans will fall in love with anybody, no matter the talent. You could be the worst guy on the roster, but if you do something to help the community, or you have one big shot, the fans will love you.
Or you're 7'6".
That's it.
Yeah.
Bigger picture for the whole NBA.
He's an attraction,
Oh yeah, 100%.
He'll sell tickets. There's no doubt about that. People want to see him. I mean, I could see him sitting on the bench in a nice suit. I mean, I don't know if they have big and tall that size, but they're going to need a pretty big suit to. But I think he's going to, he'll probably end up playing for one of the, the D League teams. But I don't see him. Yeah, I couldn't see him starting on the on a Celtics roster, as the big man of the future. I think it was more like you said. It was, hey, this guy hasn't even done anything yet. Why are we celebrating? I mean, goodness gracious, people, calm down. He played for Central Florida. I mean.
Yeah, you and I both know some designer is going to be like, oh yeah, I can make a suit for that guy, and then he'll be sitting on the bench in his designer suit, and then that guy, whoever the designer is, will be finding a way to make a name for himself because he found a way to make a suit for a guy that's 7'6". I mean, we both know it's going to happen.
Yes. Yep.
Bigger picture now with the NBA. And this is going to be, it's 30 teams, so there's a lot you could talk about. NBA as a whole, Western Conference has a lot of talent, Eastern Conference less, but the teams are still, there's a lot of young teams, a lot of teams that are grooming. I mean, my Pacers, I think they only have 4 players from their team from last season. I mean, the roster's kind of revamped. How do you think the NBA as a whole this year will go? Will it be better than last year? Will it be the same as last year? Do you think? Just go wherever you want, man.
Yeah. Well, I can say this: the Warriors aren't gonna make the NBA Finals. I think teams are really enjoying beating them pretty bad. I think everyone's pulling out all the stops, to really beat up on them, which is expected. I don't see the Warriors down for very long. I think this year, yes. But Clay's going to come back and Curry's there, and I think Russell just put up 50-something points the other night. I mean, they've got talent all over the place. Plus, with the ownership and what they've built there has really been incredible. So I don't foresee them, staying down for very long. Maybe this year because of health, because of Durant leaving. There's a whole lot of situations that have arisen for them, but there's certainly a draw where they are, California. Who doesn't want to go out and play, in a new stadium, in sunny California, and compete with the Clippers and the Lakers. I want to compete with them. So for the state of California, basketball is pretty incredible right now. Certainly with Kawhi going to the Clippers, I don't think Paul George is back yet. I may be wrong about that, but
I don't think he is.
They haven't even come into full form yet, and he's playing out of his mind. I mean, the guy's incredible defensively. I would say, right now, I would say he's the best player in the world. That's, in my opinion, just from watching the finals to now, what he's able to do is really incredible. So I would, I'd put them right up there, obviously, with the Lakers. My pick to win the finals is the Lakers. I just think that with LeBron and Anthony Davis, that tandem, because you got some other guys, you got, Eric Caruso putting on a show right now, and they've got, it's just every time you look at a championship team, you've got the main superstars, but you've got a supporting cast around them that is, you've got some talented players. LeBron has always needed a shooter, and he's got that in Danny Green, and so that team is so loaded at different levels. It's just health. Can they stay healthy? And if they stay healthy, then I don't see why the Lakers couldn't win the whole thing. But they're going to have a tough challenge with the Clippers. I think those two teams are the teams to beat. I know everyone's, what about Houston with Harden and Westbrook and joining up and joining forces? There's only one ball. And so to me, it's can they coexist? Can they give each other their share? And when do those two superstar players who need to have the ball in their hand every single time they go down the floor, both clear them out, isolation players, when do they say, hey, it's my night to shine, and that thing blows up? I don't know. But I just don't see how, that them coexisting through a whole season and able to, because you saw a lot with Westbrook and Durant. I mean, you're talking about two MVP players, all-time great players, but they when it mattered the most, they wanted the ball, they wanted to shine, and it just didn't work. And I think you're going to see that with Westbrook and Harden. And I think with Anthony Davis, he's still so young, he's willing to give up the spotlight to LeBron and willing to be that piece that puts LeBron over the edge, to get him his, was his fourth title, it would be. And so I certainly think that, with that tandem, I think it's a better – I think if you look at these duos in the league with Westbrook, Harden, LeBron, Davis, Paul George, and Kawhi, I think the strongest is Davis and LeBron. I think Davis is an all-world player. I think he's still so young that he's still developing, whereas you've got these other guys that have been around a while. Paul George has been dealing with injuries. As a Pacers fan, he's been dealing with injuries his whole career. And so, do we know if he's going to stay healthy or not? We don't know. But at this point, and of course, LeBron just basically got the whole playoffs off to rest. He's refreshed. He's excited. He's got Anthony. He got who he wanted. I believe that's exactly who LeBron wanted. He got the man that he wanted, and it's the showtime, I think, is coming back a little bit over there with the Lakers.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
The champions coming out of those three teams, though, I would say Clippers, Lakers, Rockets, but I would give the edge to the Lakers.
Okay. Luka Doncic. I know most people have watched him play at least once this season.
Love him.
Young player. You didn't know what to expect when he came in because he's from a different country. So it's not like we're watching him every single day in college or whatever it may be where you can watch him. How do you think he has played, and how good do you think he can be? Because right now it seems like the sky is the limit.
Oh man, I think he's incredible. I really do. I think the fact that you put Porzingis with him, I think that's just Mark Cuban there, the Mavericks, they've built such a great organization. The fact that you had Dirk all that time, and now you've got these other European players coming in, and they're just phenomenal. I think he's phenomenal. I think he's going to play well for a long time. He's pretty much going to take the mantle that Dirk had, and take that team. That's his team, and they're going to build around him for a long time. I mean, he's a rookie of the year. You look at his stats through the amount of time he's played. His stats are right up there with some of the all-time greatest players. If you look at just stat-wise. But if he could stay healthy, and he's got a great coach, is it Carlisle, I believe? He's got a great coach there that is a championship caliber coach, and I just think he's phenomenal. I really think he's got a great attitude. He's just all around. He's a good guy.
Yeah. I'm not going to go as far as someone on Facebook did, but someone recently said that Luka Doncic can be better than Larry Bird. I don't like going that far, especially with a young player, but do you think there's some truth to that statement?
It's yet to see. Yet to see.
Yeah.
Honestly, possibly, but I don't know. I wouldn't go that far yet. I mean, talking about Larry Bird here, man. He's one of the all-time best.
Yeah.
It's tough to say.
And that's all she wrote for today. We're going to stop it right there. Come back a week from today, next Monday, to hear part 2 of my conversation with Garrett. Next week will be all about the NFL, all about football, New England Patriots, this current season, Indianapolis Colts, Peyton Manning, how he views Peyton Manning's offense that Peyton Manning and those Colts used to run so well back in the day. Also talks about system quarterbacks and who he thinks is a system quarterback. A different view that I don't think I have heard anyone say as of yet. So come back a week from today to hear part 2 of the conversation that I had with Garrett. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Jay Stevens Podcast. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at Dr_J25. You can follow us on Instagram at Jay Stevens Podcast. You can send all emails to jstevenspod@gmail.com. Remember to always subscribe, rate, and review. It's a great way for people that are searching for a new podcast to listen to come across this one. And remember to always get the word out about the podcast via word of mouth. The things that we enjoy in life, we are more willing and somewhat wired to tell other people about. So no matter if this was your first episode or if you have been listening since episode 1, be sure people know about the podcast. This has been episode 39 of the Jay Stevens Podcast. I'll see you next time.